What is up, YouTube? Jason here, and today I'll be looking at more of the brothers Karamazov, right? So I've already discussed Alyosha, I've discussed Dmitri. Today we will be discussing the man himself, the intellectual, the serious, ironic Ivan, right? Ivan Karamazov. And if we think of each brother as an embodiment of something, an embodiment of an idea or an emotion, right? Dmitri embodying madness and a perversion of love, obsession. Alyosha embodying faith and love and sanctity, like holiness of Christ, of God. And now Ivan embodying nihilism, atheism, and I would say evil, right? The devil. So I want to take you in just to some of my thoughts, what I've pulled out of Ivan's argument. And as we're going through, I'm going to maybe hint on some of the chapters and hint at his argument, right? But like I said, we're going to just go sort of through his over his thought process and where it maybe leads him. Okay, so, and I'm reading from my journal, right? He's ironic, as I mentioned, serious, sullen, gloomy to be around, right? When he's talking to Alyosha in the chapter Rebellion, he's almost foaming at the mouth to prove his point. He's sort of seething and sarcastic, okay? But he's of course an intellectual. He's very intelligent. He's highly intelligent. He spars not with fists, but with a thesis, body paragraphs, including textual support and other evidence, and a conclusion that, having laid out his argument, considers its impact on the future. He's very articulate, but he's also formulaic in his thoughts. And because of this, you know, in Rebellion, he needs an answering, he needs something to atone for this suffering of children. He says that man has eaten the forbidden fruit and therefore damned himself. But children who are completely innocent and apart from this, and are almost like their own creatures, separate from humans, why must they answer for the sins of their fathers? Of course, he then goes into, you know, listing a litany of crimes committed against children and suffering of children. You know, Turks pillaging serfs and throwing babies and catching them on their ends of their bayonets. You know, he says something along the lines of, you know, Christ-like love for man is impossible here on earth. You know, people can have empathy for like a more universal type of suffering, such as they can have empathy for Ivan if he's hungry and they can feed him, but they cannot have empathy for his ideas, for a higher level of suffering, which has Ivan is so much plagued by, right? And so, if you were to go on a picnic with Ivan, he'd use all the surrounding fresh air in the expounding of your fundamental flaw that has predestined you to a life of self and societal deterioration. For someone so opposed to God, right, we learn why he's opposed to God, as I mentioned in Rebellion and in the Grand Inquisitor. He says, you know, like along the lines of, if we really need all this suffering so we can have the contrast between good and evil, if the devil must exist so we know when we are experiencing happiness, so we have this contrast. Like, is it really worth the cost? Is it worth the cost of this child suffering? And he doesn't obviously feel so. He also says in the Grand Inquisitor, that chapter is a precursor to the Grand Inquisitor. His prose that he wrote about Jesus coming back to earth. And in the Grand Inquisitor, Jesus was tempted, or the clergyman lists all these grievances against Jesus and God, and says, if you would have taken Satan's temptations, turned breads into stone to feed man, so he wouldn't be hungry, and this would give him happiness. If you would have thrown yourself off a temple and performed this miracle and given man proof of your existence, he wouldn't be shrouded in doubt of your existence, obviously. And he could believe you, and believe your teachings with 100% confidence. And if you would have taken all-wielding power, because man does not wish for freedom, he'd rather be told what to do. And because you didn't take these temptations, once you left, we, the church, we took the temptations upon ourselves. We now provide man with structure. We perform the illusions. We are God, right? And Ivan, having, understanding that there is no God and that God and the devil were both made in man's likeness, he feels as though he is God, right? He is a man God. And obviously this later is what Satan reiterates to him. But so continuing on, of course God, as Alyosha sort of mimics, he cannot answer for these grievances, but he can only show the clergyman love at the end of the Grand Inquisitor by kissing him and walking away. And then I say, for someone so opposed to God, he spends a lot of time contemplating his existence and his ability as an architect, right? In Rebellion, Ivan says something along the lines of Alyosha, would you be an architect of a world in which the edifice had to be built on the unavenged suffering of children? And Alyosha answers, well, no, I wouldn't. And that's sort of Ivan's gotcha moment. But of course, then Alyosha later responds, I'm not the architect, though. It's Jesus who is the architect. And it is he who makes everything right and has taken our suffering upon himself. And Ivan, of course, this leads Ivan to saying, even if at the end it is revealed to us by God the reason for all this suffering, is this hosanna, this joy at the end, worth the cost, right? And again, Ivan believes not. So for someone so opposed to God, he spends a lot of time contemplating his existence and his ability as an architect. His hubris has sequestered him to life along the periphery. It would be an insult to his intellect to blindly accept Catholicism and God without thorough examination into its design in inner workings. This is partially the reason why Ivan is so spent on thinking through God and his possibility of existence. It's also the case that Ivan wants to believe. This is also why the devil later tells Ivan, he keeps repeating, the devil is saying, I wish I was a woman of 250 pounds who lit a candle and placed it at the altar. The devil himself says he wants to believe because, of course, the devil is mimicking Ivan. He's reiterating Ivan's thoughts and showing, the devil is inside of you, Ivan. He also wants to confuse Ivan by telling him original thoughts. So he wants to confuse him and keep him in a state of doubt. But like I said, it would be an insult to his intellect to blindly accept Catholicism and God without thorough examination into its design and inner workings. Ivan is someone who not only needs to understand God, but the mechanisms by which constitute his existence. Because God cannot exist without Satan, and neither good without evil. This calls into question God's morality, as happiness and joy are only given meaning through the comparison to pain and suffering. Ivan is an atheist who can't shake God's divinity, nor Satan's temptations, creating a conundrum so palpable the paradox threatens to take his life if left unresolved. Ivan knows this and also understands that logic and reason, a Euclidean understanding of the world, can only account for so much, right? He says this in Rebellion. Ivan says, I understand that cause and effect is the way of the world, but I want justice. And if I don't get justice, I will, tear myself to pieces. People have faith because heartbreak, hardship, and death don't come with a manual or the afflicted's guide. Rather, God is the light which illuminates the path when darkness envelops the heart. This is all well and good to Ivan, except for the question that arises after the final hosanna has been sung. Is this twisted, tumultuous, artistically cruel ride? Ivan says humans are artistically cruel. A lion will, track its prey down and tear it to shreds, but human torture, right, and take pleasure out of seeing children even suffering. Is this cruel ride worth it? The answer for Ivan is a resounding no. And this is a quote towards the end of Rebellion. I don't reject God, but merely return my ticket. So how else are you supposed to take this than Ivan denouncing life? And in such a meaningless world, what is the only answer to this meaningless, suffering world than to commit suicide in defiance, right? For a God who is supposedly omniscient and omnipotent, we live in a hellscape, ripe with not only suffering, but child suffering, as I've already alluded to. If God was created in our image, so was his foil, Satan. Ivan feels abandoned by the light and has accepted his being adopted by the dark. He was manipulated and neglected by his father. This creates resentment and a lust for retribution in Ivan. And the harboring of those feelings, in combination with a resounding intellect, fuels Ivan's cynical, nihilism/atheism. Unfortunately, it takes patricide, the murder of his father, Fyodor Karamazov, by his half-brother Smerdyakov, guilt as well, which emerges from the possibility of participating or precipitating the killing, and a chance meeting with the devil during a hallucination to make Ivan concede. To concede that the fact that there are limitations to his argument, that logic and reason can only account for so much because life doesn't follow rules of a mathematical equation. What the devil said about Ivan may be true. He may only possess 1,000th of a grain of faith, but should faith get the upper hand over doubt, this seed will not produce an oak tree Ivan may later hang himself from. Having taken a longing for justice out on his person, right? But a whole forest will be begotten, enriching the lifeblood of Ivan and all his disciples. Ivan is likely to have disciples if he can get past this sort of isolation that he's found himself in, or this isolated state. And if he takes on a new perspective, and is willing to inject some faith into the mix, and to go out on a limb, right? A forest is likely to be erected in place of his once like nihilistic atheism, a forest that will give life and enrich not only himself but those around him who follow him, who get much out of talking to Ivan. And this sort of leads all to the question, right? Obviously, because then once it's revealed to Ivan that Smerdyakov is the murderer, and Smerdyakov sort of manipulates Ivan into believing that, you sanction the murder, Ivan. Ivan then hallucinates, and he sees the devil as a nightmare. And like I said, the devil confuses him. He reiterates his thoughts, and it's all in an attempt to pick up, to fully give in to the devil. The devil says at the end, like, why do you need a moral sanction to swindle? Why do humans need a moral sanction to swindle if there is no God? And he's getting louder and louder until Alyosha finally shows up at the end, causing him to disappear, to recede. And this perhaps saves Ivan's life, saves him from following in Smerdyakov's path and hanging himself. But this all leads to the question, right? Is God's providence and the devil's alluring charisma present within the novel? Or is the existence of God and the devil and their ability to influence thought and behavior merely psychosomatic, right? Does God and the devil actually exist, right? Is God's providence and the devil's dark charisma actually influencing people, or is it merely psychosomatic? And people sort of create their own reality and fall victim to their own illusions of God. And I think the answer, I think it's irrelevant because the two are sort of indistinguishable. Because, given that God exists separate from our world and beyond total comprehension, it really doesn't make much of a difference. Ivan wants, obviously, total comprehension, while Alyosha allows faith to account for blind spots. And because Ivan wants total comprehension, he can't concede. It takes all this and the murder of his father and the possibility of playing a role and even the devil visiting himself to concede, right? And to potentially have faith in something instead of trying to account for everything with logic and reason. The more important question, I would say, right, from all of this is, how do you choose to live your life with this knowledge? It's not required to vilify and dismiss the Lord because you spot a chink in his armor, nor must you accept God's word as an absolute truism, as an absolute law. Rather, wrestle with his ideas and form your own conclusions about their validity. I think we should have a more nuanced approach to Christianity, right, than defaulting to these simple truths about Jesus's teachings. We're meant to wrestle with his ideas and allow intuition and informed decision making to inform our own, on our own conclusions, right? To come up with our own conclusions on the matter. And it's unfortunate, as I said, that it takes all of this for Ivan to see this, to to recognize that there is faith inside of him. And he is tearing himself apart because there is this faith, but his intellect won't allow him to believe it's true, right? Or to take this leap of faith that God may actually exist. You know, Ivan doesn't have to believe 100% of the time that God is out there. Instead, have faith at the possibility and use his teachings to inform upon your life and augment your life instead of, vilifying, set out because there is a shred of doubt and because doubt exists, like vilifying and dismissing the Lord. So, yeah, I think just in my own conclusion, Ivan is, you hear people talk about Dostoevsky makes his, the villains or the opposite of what he believes, right, to be as strong as possible. And Ivan is as strong as possible. That's obviously evidence of Dostoevsky's greatness as an author. He presents arguments, especially in Rebellion, of child suffering, and in the Grand Inquisitor, that are sort of irrefutable. But because how can you account for children that have been tortured just to fulfill some sick, twisted fantasy, or to for some sick level of gratification? And there really is no just cause for this. Rather, to have faith that we can live life in truth, and by doing so, if we all do so, we can constitute a reality that is built on love and truth. And obviously you see Alyosha living this way. And Alyosha's goodness and his holiness, it has, whether Ivan wants to admit it or not, rubbed off on him a bit. And Alyosha is a light for Ivan in just such a dark and bleak world. So he's something of Ivan's savior, right, here on earth. So yeah, that's been my interpretation of Ivan as representing atheism and nihilism and the devil. So I'm still not done the novel. I just finished the first chapter of the trial, and I'm going to keep going. I'm on page, on page 767 out of 897. So yeah, a little over 100 pages left to go. I think once I'm done, I don't know if I'll do a video on Smerdyakov or not. I think once I'm done, I'm just going to give some type of final thoughts on the novel. I'm not sure. It might be worth breaking down different chapters, breaking down Rebellion, breaking down the Grand Inquisitor, because of course these are dense chapters and they could use a thorough analysis. But yeah, we'll see. I'll just continue reading and then go from there. But yeah, thanks for watching, you guys, and just keep on the lookout for more videos to come. Thanks.